Hello, I am Luch.Adore, and today I adore social interaction. I know. What an extrovert I must be. This is my loose show on things I'd like to teach about, typically on TTRPGs like D&D, and especially 5th edition, but I also work with older editions in games like Blades in the Dark, Powered by the Apocalypse games, sometimes Cyberpunk Red, and a bunch of other stuff. I host a game for my friends that's been going on relatively well for a few years now, but other than that, I'm an avid reader, a writer, and obviously a gamer. So, social interaction, which the community sometimes just calls role-playing, though I think that's a bit unhelpful, is a ubiquitous part of the game. It's probably the part that people who are unfamiliar with the game focus on first as something that might make playing a bit intimidating or awkward. But social interaction as a category of what the game is about doesn't require using a character voice or having long dialogue performances, though that can be a part of it if you want. Today we're going to be talking about how the game explains the methods and purposes of social interaction, where that excels and where it might fall short. Fall short of expressing that social interaction in D&D is a tool intended to be used by the game, the players, and the DM in order to influence each other, so that the world is interconnected with itself and the players are connected to the world by the DM, thereby generating goals and conflict that self-perpetuates. So first things first, we're going to have to ask, what's important? The 2014 Player's Handbook says that social interaction is essentially whenever the adventurers are talking to someone or something else. The book also provides a few examples of likely circumstances where the players are going to do this, such as getting information through interrogations, getting information as a reward for saving someone, getting information by convincing a magical object, and, as a standout example, pleading for mercy from an orc chieftain. The obvious pattern that this book wants you to understand is that social interaction is a key way to distribute information, and yet again, combat does not need to be a fight to the death. Even hostile creatures can be spoken with. The handbook also says that engaging in social interaction is a two-part process: roleplay, which is the interaction, and mechanics, which are the tools that can be used in context to determine results. So first we're going to talk about roleplay. Roleplay is the more complicated part of this process, because the execution is mostly left up to the discretion of the group. The book doesn't want to limit genre or accessibility of this much. It's a much more personal pillar of play. So apart from providing pointers and advice about ways your roleplay can be more effective, there's really not much to say. In some ways, this part is intuitive. If you're able to read this book and play this game, you're probably at least somewhat familiar with the way conversing with people works. And at the end of the day, pretending to talk to someone is usually easier than doing it for real. So the book provides two models for roleplay. You can go descriptive or active. Basically, you can either tell everyone what a character is doing or intending, or you can go the extra mile and act it out as best as you can. DMs are further encouraged in their guide to engage characters and players strategically with different techniques in order to ensure everyone is having fun. Regardless of how your group is most comfortable playing their roles, players are encouraged to pay attention to the behaviors of non-player characters, because choosing your method, the way that you are engaging socially, choosing so by the person you're engaging with's traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws, is a good way to influence their attitude to your benefit. Engaged and intentional role-playing is the key to effective social interaction, and it requires the whole group to be mindful of the behaviors and intentions of their and each other's characters. As far as mechanics go, the handbook makes it clear that as far as players need to concern themselves, apart from encouragement to role-play in the manner most fitting the skills of your character, the DM is in charge of when to roll an ability check, and that's your only general mechanic for social interaction, outside of anything a class might have to specifically influence a situation. That's not to say there isn't any other mechanics, it's just that they're all meant to be primarily invisible to players. That being said, the main mechanic DMs deal with is setting the difficulty class, or DC, for the aforementioned ability checks, based on the attitude of the non-player characters, otherwise known as NPCs, and then deciding when to tell the players to make those ability checks. The NPC's attitude can be based on any number of factors, but it's generally pretty obvious when a creature should be considered either friendly, indifferent, or hostile. And ability checks are also up to DM discretion, but generally should be called for whenever the players reach the part of the interaction where the NPC should decide how to respond. After they make their demand or request or whatever it is that prompts the NPC to react or answer. As far as the DM support goes, most of the nuance of social interaction that can be covered by the book is in the form of advice on how to create and play content that enables a diverse array of interaction while also ensuring that the scope of play stays within what the DM prepares or is comfortable generating. The guide says that the amount of focus on either roleplay or mechanics is mostly up to preference, but it indicates that, as you might expect, a balance between player skill in roleplaying and character skill in mechanics is best. But the word might is thrown around a lot in the DM's guide, and it's pretty critical to the application of the mechanics for social interaction, usually in how the use of the mechanics is intended to be at the DM's discretion for resolving uncertainty or introducing an opportunity for chance. We have examples like a friendly creature might need a charisma check to convince them to take a risk, but otherwise might not. A hostile creature might be unable to be swayed by a charisma check, no matter what you roll. A neutral creature might help or hinder depending on their needs, and players who leverage a creature's personality might temporarily change their attitude. Designing NPCs and encounters is relatively straightforward, but very much meant to be a base for the DM and the players to develop their interactions. Factions and the rules for renown and the optional loyalty rules provide a highly accessible route to connect the world together, as well as connect the players to the world in a way that intuitively leads to a sense of progression. Looking at all of this, it's clear that there's not an overabundance of mechanical detail to turn social interaction into much of a game in and of itself, like how some people consider combat. However, it's also clear that the intent behind these rules and advice is for the players to be focused on how their characters would interact with people in the world, and for the DM to be capable of creating and facilitating these fictional people and their connections to the world. This all begs the question, why should the game use this method of interaction? Why not operate in a direct data system instead of this beat around the bush method of teasing out goals when the players ask the right people the right questions? Well, I think there's two main reasons why social interaction matters, and both of them have to do with connections, bonds, if you will. The first reason is the social interaction allows the group to influence each other and the world. See, the gathering of information is a key element to the expected gameplay of Dungeons & Dragons. Unless the DM throws the party right into the middle of action, the group must first decide on a plan, even if the extent of that plan is just what to look at first. Even when available information is minimal, the players still require an adequate understanding of the situation in order to feel comfortable or justified in making decisions, which is the core of what players' role in playing the game is. The player's main role is to make decisions. Lots of information can be gathered asocially through observation or the other tools given to the players to explore a given situation. But there is no way of dispensing information more straightforward than basic communication. Talking to quest givers, interviewing witnesses, or interrogating captured adversaries are all direct ways of getting data the players need from the world to the characters. And thusly, the DM influences the players by distributing information in select ways, and the players influence the DM by choosing who to interact with and in what way. This is basically every time you make a social engagement, whether it's an encounter or something that happens just because somebody was present and the player desired to talk to them in some way, you're given the opportunity, and the players are requesting the opportunity, whether they know it or not, to get more information, and in doing so, change how they're interacting with the world. Or at least inform how they're interacting with the world. But beyond influencing through indirect understanding, social interaction is also a tool for more direct influence. The players can influence the world by causing it to take certain actions. You can convince or coerce characters into providing aid or service, potentially in exchange for service in turn. The world can influence the players by providing desirable goals and motivations for the players to pursue. Players generally respond better to information from a trustworthy source, including things like job offers, but even unreliable sources can be informative. However, it's important to be wary when using the actors within the game as a source of information that one of the most frustrating things in real life and in a game is a miscommunication. Both as players or the DM, it's important to err on the side of transparency and clarification whenever confusion could arise. But at the same time, this clarity can easily be handled outside of whatever fictional situation is at hand. That's actually a major benefit here. If the characters in the game are in the midst of a complex or heated communication, there's nothing wrong with taking a moment to pause the game and make sure everyone understands what everyone's actual actions are, or what their motivations are, if that kind of information is reasonable to share. The second reason for social interaction is that social interaction allows the world to develop new adventures. The first adventure of a campaign can often come about simply out of necessity, and a minimal pretense for the group to play the game. It's not super important why the characters are working together to clear rats out of a basement. If the group wants to play D&D, and are just looking for a jumping off point, then that's totally fine. But after the, so to speak, inciting incident, players usually need a reason to engage with the world in a certain direction. They need a goal to progress towards, or a metric to prove themselves by, and social interaction is the avenue by which these connections to the world form. See, factions are a source of opportunities and adoptable goals. If the party throws their lot in with an agreeable organization, or a disagreeable organization earns their ire, the agents of that faction act to supply a theoretically infinite number of plot hooks or objectives to aid or thwart. Dependent NPCs are a source of expense, justifying the work needed to support and protect, because the innocent villagers struggling under the foot of a corrupt sheriff can be a motivation on their own if their plight is sympathetic enough to players, or at least their characters. And if players get to a point in the game where they've established themselves as responsible for a group of some people, those people's needs like money and food and safety can be set behind an adventure. Villains are a target, which can set up numerous obstacles in between the heroes and themselves, or redirect attention to new opportunities. Everybody loves to see a smug monster defeated, and that victory is made sweeter when it takes work to reach them. Underlings and defenses can take time and effort to knock down and smash through, but it's fun to do. And even after a villain is defeated, their goals can point to other contemptible monsters that need to be stopped. Evil loves company. Bear in mind, when trying to apply this, that more adventure is not a reward the players are supposed to work for. This method of using social interaction is meant to be accessible, and the interesting part is discovering what the adventurers do, not necessarily how they learn that there is something to do. Let adventurers who grow in renown with a faction earn more fantastic quests with greater loot, but don't lock an adventure behind a wall because your players aren't cool enough to see it yet. Don't get caught up in what happens behind the scenes. All of that is meant to facilitate play, not replace it. Finally, we're moving to sort of the application. All of this talk about social interaction, what it is, and why it's worthwhile is worthless without some examples on how it can be applied. So first things first, we can use social interaction the way most people think of or do. It's the first thing to do whenever someone wants to talk. It might seem obvious, but as we've gone over, there's a lot of reasons people want to talk to the adventurers, and a lot of reasons the adventurers would want to talk to various people. Take these opportunities when they arise, which they will, one way or another, to feed the party with tips and rumors, plot hooks, and lore about the world around them. You don't need to suddenly drop every single detail about the world the moment that something comes up, but if somebody is talking to a shopkeep or a bartender, they should be able to share at least one hint that can redirect the engaging player to wherever the DM planned a particular quest to start. It really pays to have some random tables of rumors at the ready, so no matter who the players bump into, they'll be flush with leads to follow up on if they so choose. Repeat interactions can even grow into bonds that invest players in the well-being or interests of friendly or frustrating NPCs, meaning dropping information about them or through them is more likely to keep the player's attention. But outside of the normal sources of information, consider how many monsters are equipped with the ability to talk. A corner goblin can have all sorts of interesting or valuable social interaction with the adventurers. The DM can make the party think twice about leaving no survivors if even a single hostage or captive opens the door to secret treasure, insider information, or even just some form of entertainment. Another way that might be less obvious is to base an entire adventure on interacting with other people. Adventures that take place in civilization or entirely dealing with social matters can shake up the way the group thinks about achieving their goals and encourage players to think outside of ability scores and lean into backstory and background experience. Most characters in D&D have features and traits that get entirely ignored in a combat or exploration-focused adventure, because adventurers can usually get by with their strength or their wits. But a social-forward adventure is a good way to get players to break out of their molds and try to solve problems through new angles. Furthermore, while the classic method of obtaining titles and authority is through displays of power or acts of extreme violence, flattery and guile can often be a good way into the courts of the powerful, be they courts of men or the good side of a mighty dragon. And these socially focused adventures aren't limited to social interaction. The same way that a dungeon crawl or a march through the wilderness should include all three pillars of play, a mystery or a political intrigue should include and feature combat situations and exploration. Social interaction can seem hard to feature in a game with magic and brute force, but with just a little consideration and interest from the group, which is the players and the DM, you can have numerous adventures where the party is determined to keep things civil, and the DM is throwing truly unexpected or dreaded combat-shaped wrenches into their plans. So what's the appeal of all this? Social interaction can seem intimidating, embarrassing, or even boring. And if the group isn't mindful, it really can become all of those things. But the group that jumps at the opportunity to learn names and talk to familiar faces and introduce themselves to new ones is a group with purpose. Purpose to the world, and purposes to move the world forward. It doesn't always, if ever, mean lengthy monologues or dialogues with silly voices and fake names, but it can always mean discovering new things about the characters and the world that is made together by the group. Because Dungeons & Dragons is a tabletop role-playing game, one that features combat, exploration, and social interaction. And like I said before, you can certainly run a game that ignores any part of that trinity, but in doing so, you miss out on the fun that it has to offer. Social interaction is a feature. The way each player and the DM can probe the world for new things to discover and incite a change, whether that be at the end of another adventure or within the people we're adventuring for, inside and outside of the game. So thanks for watching this video, which, even though I found it much easier to talk about concisely, was interrupted in the production several times. Whoops. Anyways, if you liked this video and you want to see more like it, I plan on posting one for every week this year, even if it sometimes takes more than a week to post. The next video will be about making monsters for D&D, more specifically the methods that I use for my game, though I expect a fair amount of discussion about the considerations that could be valuable in any sort of game of D&D's flavor. Anyways, again, if you want to see more of this content, leave a like and subscribe, and turn on notifications. I sometimes post clips from gaming with my friends, but I can't promise anything about their quality or content. But if you have any suggestions for future topics, or if you want to mention something that you thought was interesting about the video, leave a comment. But that's it. Okay, bye-bye. That's it. Bye-bye.